About to get going, so if anybody wants to take a seat, plan to take a seat. Also reminding this meeting tonight will be recorded and available on DCR's website after the meeting. Okay. So good evening. I'm Robert Lowell. I'm the Deputy Chief of Design and Engineering at DCR. And I welcome you tonight to the Watertown Library for our first public meeting, informational meeting on DCR's investigative study of the alternatives to remove the Watertown Dam. So we have just our introductory slide here from the Commonwealth on behalf of the Governor and Commissioner Brian Arrigo. Thank you for being here tonight. DCR likes to start our public meetings with our mission statement to promote, protect, and enhance our Commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. And we appreciate you being here tonight. And we have hired GZA consultants to work on the study for the dam. This is also a study in partnership with Charles River Watershed Association. So they're here tonight helping us with the meeting, and we appreciate all their assistance. Principal Chad Cox from GZA will take over the meeting, and we'll have questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, my name is Chad Cox. I'm a civil engineer and senior principal with GZA Geoenvironmental. We've been hired by the DCR to assist them with the Watertown Dam removal alternatives analysis study. This is our first community meeting. There will be another after the project has progressed and we've gotten further into our study. So thank you for coming out today. This is an introductory meeting. We want to kind of set the stage for the project that we're doing, which is an alternatives analysis study, kind of put some facts out to the community and then get some feedback from the community. So that's our goal for tonight. Our meeting agenda is a very brief introduction to dams. This is a potential dam removal project. We are dam engineers and river restoration ecologists, so we want to talk a little bit about dams and then switch very quickly into just an overview of the Watertown Dam specifically, talk a little bit about the project, its purpose, its scope, this particular project, the project as the study, and then progress into a discussion of why remove a dam, why remove the Watertown Dam in particular. And at the end, we'll have time for questions and comments. We're going to do this presentation in two parts. I'll go first and then tag team with my colleague Rex. So as an introduction to dams, amazingly, there are over 3,000 dams in the Commonwealth. More than 300 of those are owned by the state government itself. So for a state that is not huge, we have a lot of dams. Each one of those dots on the map represents a dam that is in the state's inventory of dams. So a known dam on a stream creating an impoundment. Dams have benefits. Dams have been built for thousands of years by humans for specific purposes: water supply, irrigation, industrial power, many purposes. Many of our dams, and you can see they're scattered throughout the state, were built as a part of the Industrial Revolution. Many dams were small dams put up on any stream that could be found next to a mill that was making blankets or shoes or turning a saw. And these dams helped drive the growth of the state. However, that was a long time ago. Many of these dams are now what we often call legacy dams. So they're dams that continue to exist, but no longer serve their original purpose. And that can be a problem because while their benefits are somewhat outdated, their impacts remain, and the requirement to maintain them, because they do represent a potential threat to public safety, that stays. And so that's one of the reasons why The Commonwealth regulates dams, and it's one of the reasons why older dams are sometimes repaired or removed. So the state regulates dams in the Commonwealth through its Office of Dam Safety. It has regulations that all dam owners have to abide by. The regulations define certain characteristics of dams, such as size. So dams are characterized as either non-jurisdictional, which means basically too small to be regulated, or they fall into the category of small, intermediate, or large based on the height of the dam or the volume of the water impounded by the dam. Dams are also categorized by their hazard classification. So any of these small, intermediate, or large dams may pose a risk to downstream public safety. And so the state looks at the physical location of the dam and the people and buildings and infrastructure and environment downstream and gives each dam a hazard classification: low, which is, as it indicates, a low hazard; significant, or high hazard. Significant being a dam where loss of life may occur, and high hazard being a dam where loss of life is likely to occur. So the Watertown Dam is an intermediate significant hazard dam. A little history of the Watertown Dam. So prior to first contact with European civilizations, the indigenous people in the Charles River had fish weirs in this location. So for many years, this location was known to be an area where fish were present and were harvested by native people. In 1634, a stone dam was constructed and used to power a mill and mills thereafter. So grist mills, paper mills, other sorts of industrial concerns, starting primarily with hydromechanical power. So when you think of the Hoover Dam, that's a dam that uses hydropower to generate electricity. Most early dams were not generating electricity. They were generating raw mechanical power. A turbine turned a wheel, that turned a belt, that turned a shaft, that made a loom go. So then in the early 1900s, active use of the dam for hydropower generation came to an end. This is a common story with our dams in the Commonwealth. As steam power became prevalent, as electricity reached the mills, the use of the dams fell away. Oftentimes, the dams weren't reliable for power because they really could only turn a loom when the water was flowing. So in the summer, you couldn't make things. But if you had steam power or electrical power, you could. And so the use of the dam for its intended purpose fell away. By 1966, the dam was rebuilt in its current configuration, now with the new concrete spillway that we see currently. In 1972, the Metropolitan District Commission constructed the fish ladder that's now exists on the right bank at the end, on the right side of the spillway. Just for reference, dam engineers always talk left and right when looking downstream. So bear that in mind as we go through. And now the dam is currently owned and operated by Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. So a brief overview of the dam. Just, I know many people here are familiar with it, but just so we all have our terminology straight. So here we've got an aerial photo. The Charles River is flowing from left to right in the photo. And on the left bank, up in the upper right-hand corner, we have the what we call the left or the north earth embankment. That then transitions into the concrete OG-shaped spillway, which is about 180 feet long. That's the primary structure of the dam. Many dams, have a structure that you can see. You think of the Hoover Dam and a giant wall of concrete. Because this is what we call a run-of-the-river dam, the majority of the structure is typically hidden by water, because the intent is that water into the upstream impoundment, the flow rate into the upstream impoundment is basically equal to the flow rate that passes out. It's really not intended to store water. It's really the dam in its original purpose, just intended to raise the height of the dam to provide head for the hydropower generation. Head meaning depth of water. And then as we move down towards the bottom of the photograph, we come to the fish ladder structure. The fish ladder structure is the concrete sort of box that's there on the right bank, on the south bank. It provides for upstream fish passage, or at least it intends to provide for upstream fish passage. And if you're eagle-eyed, you'll also see that immediately adjacent to it is a stop log structure with some boards that can be taken out. Though the intent of that is to provide a little bit of control for the level of the impoundment in the event of the need for maintenance, but it's also really intended to provide for some concentration of flow for downrunner fish who are coming down, and instead of having them sort of just flop over the dam during low flow, we can concentrate the flow and put the fish through a more distinct channel. And then along the right bank, upstream of the fish ladder, between the fish ladder and the pedestrian bridge, is actually another earthen embankment. It's very subtle, but if you walk out along the path on the right bank, on the south side, you'll see that there's a little mound of earth with trees on it, but it is what we consider part of the structure itself because it serves a function in maintaining the river channel behind the dam at high flows. It sort of raises the bank a little bit, and so we call that the right earthen embankment dike. Current purpose, we've already gone through, no longer really serving its intended purpose. So right now it's aesthetics, which is of course in the eye of the beholder. It is recreation, and it is a part of the overall Charles River flood control project. So the DCR operates many dams on the Charles River that are a part of an overall Charles River flood control system. Does this dam provide substantial flood control in and of itself? That's part of the study that we're looking at, but it is part of the overall system. Here is a map of the overall system. On the right side of the map is the downstream end of the Charles River, which ends with the Charles River New Dam. So the Charles River New Dam is the head of tide. It separates the harbor from the basin, and it creates the basin. So prior to a dam at the head of tide, the basin, the large wide body of water along the Esplanade, that was a tidal flat. And then when the Charles was dammed, that then created the basin. The DCR also owns and operates the Charles River New Dam, and it protects the city from flooding, both from river water coming downstream and from tidal surge water going back upstream. So upstream of the Charles River New Dam is the basin, and then the river transitions into more of a traditional, channelized river. And then the next dam is the Watertown Dam. So beyond, the Watertown Dam is the second dam from the tide. And then upstream of the Watertown Dam are a number of additional dams that exist along the Charles, legacy dams, similar to the Watertown Dam, all the way up through the watershed. Some owned by the state, some owned by municipalities, some breached, some partially breached, some being considered for breaching. So again, the Watertown Dam, an intermediate-sized dam, primarily because not of its height, but because of the volume of water it can impound. The hazard potential is significant. So it's important to know when talking about dams that the hazard potential of a dam is completely unrelated to its condition. So its condition is a indicator of the physical state that the dam is in. The hazard potential is the potential for downstream damage in the hypothetical event of a failure. So a dam could be in good condition, but a high hazard dam because a lot of people live downstream of it. So those are separate criteria. So significant hazard, as you can read, where failure may cause loss of life and damage to facilities downstream. And then the condition of the dam currently is fair. The condition of a dam is something that is changeable. As years progress, maintenance is done or not done, vegetation grows or is controlled or is not controlled. The condition of a dam can change. And the state requires that all dam owners, even the state, have their dams inspected on a periodic basis by an independent inspector. Sometimes, like Rex and I, will be hired to inspect dams and provide an independent opinion of the condition of the dam. The last phase 1 inspection for the Watertown Dam, which was done by GZA, indicated that the dam is in fair condition, which, again, you can read, means that there are deficiencies, but no structural deficiencies. There's some uncertainty, and there may be deficiencies that exist under extreme load conditions. So the Commonwealth defines 5 possible condition ratings: good, satisfactory, fair, poor, or unsafe. Watertown Dam is fair, sort of smack in the middle. And from that phase 1 inspection that I mentioned, here are a list of some of the deficiencies that were noted. Some mature trees on that right embankment, the one along the river channel upstream. Some inadequate slope protection on the left embankment, no O&M manual, a lack of refined hydrology and hydraulics, a lack of slope stability analysis. That's actually some of the things that we're trying to address in our current study. And then, while not a dam safety concern, it is acknowledged that fish passage is a concern at the Watertown Dam. I guess charitably, the effectiveness of the fish ladder could be called questionable. So again, not a dam safety concern. There have been a number of dams removed in the Commonwealth. Myself and my colleagues have been involved in a number of them, and many times the decision to remove a dam is driven by the condition of the dam. A dam is old, it's had poor maintenance, it's been found to be in poor or unsafe condition, and the cost-effective way of remediating that safety hazard is to remove the dam. And when a dam is in poor condition or unsafe condition, the state steps in and requires the owner to take action. In this case, because the dam is in fair condition, there's no imperative to remove the dam for safety reasons. That's not really what the issue is today. But fish passage, environmental restoration, that is an issue that that's on the table, and one that we're addressing in our study for DCR. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rex.
Hey, everybody. As Chad said, I'm Rex. I also work for GZA. I have a background in hydrology and hydraulics, but I mainly focused on stream restoration, dam removal, that stuff in school. So that's kind of my specialty. For this project specifically, I'm functioning as the project manager as well as a project engineer. So to get on to the recent milestones in this project, basically in 2016, an inspection report was done on the dam that deemed it poor due to the presence of trees on the left embankment. So that's the north embankment. DCR actually dealt with that really quickly. They cut those down, did all the maintenance they needed, and now the dam is in fair condition. But after that inspection, the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration funded a dam removal feasibility study in partnership with the Charles River Watershed Association that was performed between 2018 and 2021. And the draft of that study was released in June 2021. Now, DCR has been provided funding to allow for this study to occur on the alternatives analysis for this dam. Basically, the current project was awarded in April of 2024 and is anticipated to be completed by us in fall of 2024 as well. So basically, the purpose of this project is to develop conceptual design alternatives for a breach, lowering, or removal of the dam. As part of this study, GZA is going to perform field surveys as well as an underwater inspection of the spillway and other parts of the dam. We're going to do a sediment contamination assessment. We're going to do a hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, a dam stability analysis, a groundwater analysis, and then we're going to put together some preliminary designs and renderings. So there are a lot of considerations when we're talking about a dam removal. Pretty frequent ones are listed here. There's sediment exposure issues, there's sediment removal cost, there's sediment accumulation downstream you have to worry about. There's the impact to flooding when you remove a dam. There's obviously changes to the scenery and aesthetic of the park around here. And of course, we're also going to look at the functionality of the dam, and that's whether it can safely pass its design storm, whether it's stable. And obviously, for this case, we're also going to look at fish passage. And basically, this study that GZA is undertaking with DCR, our scope is meant to address these considerations. So for example, we have the little numbers matching these considerations here for sediment contamination assessment. That's going to be addressed, for the sediment exposure issue and the sediment removal costs, that's going to be addressed by our sediment contamination assessment, by our field assessment as well. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that our scope is kind of designed to consider these issues when it comes to dam removal. So as Chad mentioned earlier, there are a bunch of benefits as well as drawbacks to a dam existing and a removal occurring. So some dam benefits that exist are the recreational uses. So might that be swimming, might that be paddling, whatever you can think of. There's the aesthetic enhancement. If you prefer a little pond or a lake rather than a river. There's the flood control benefit that may come with a dam. There's also power generation that is potentially there. There's drinking and irrigation water storage. And then of course, there's river navigability and shipping for certain cases as well. In terms of drawbacks, there is a fish passage barrier that occurs when a dam is constructed. There is large habitat alterations. There's water quality impacts. There's interruptions to the sediment movement in the river. So the dam doesn't allow sediment to move downstream, which may cause erosion downstream. There's the health and safety issue when it comes to the risk of the dam failing. There's elevated upstream flooding. There's the boating barrier, so it's a little unsafe to pass the river. You have to portage. There's the recreational hazard when it comes to swimming, potentially going over the dam. Maintenance costs when it comes to inspecting and fixing the dam as it needs to be done. And then there's disruption of natural flows. So the dam may stop floods from going by, which can be harmful to the ecosystem downstream. So this is, I want to emphasize, in general, benefits and drawbacks for the dam. We'll look a little more closely at Watertown Dam, and we'll come back to this list and talk about what benefits exist and what drawbacks exist for the Watertown Dam currently.
So these are generic.
Yes, these are generic.
For any potential dam.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to go into why we think why dam removal may occur, the thought behind it. Firstly is habitat restoration. So when you build a dam, you're changing the habitat of that river. It goes from a fast flowing, fairly shallow river into basically a pond, right? Where water is slow, water temperature can be affected pretty easily by the environment. The sediment in that river changes. It might be finer, which is not the type of sediment that a lot of native flora and fauna might enjoy or might prefer. And then, of course, the big thing is that it blocks fish passage. So fish that could previously move upstream into the watershed cannot anymore. So just to expand on that, we're going to talk about fisheries. And historically, there have been, lots of androgynous fish, so fish that go from the sea into the land in the Charles River watershed. An example of this is there are records of Atlantic salmon, which are an androgynous fish, that are found all the way up in Eagle Brook in Wrentham in the Charles River watershed. So if you can see the map on the right there, that blue shape in the very bottom, that is where Wrentham is. And basically, fish that go from sea to land were found historically in these streams all the way up in the top of this watershed. Another example of this is actually towns within the Commonwealth, Medfield, Natick, Needham, Newton, Shelburne, and Weston. It all actually complained to the General Court in 1738 that Watertown and the activities on the river there were obstructing the passage of fish upstream and being detrimental to their own fisheries. So when we talk about fish in this river, we're mainly talking about these 4 species, but there could be others that exist. So rainbow smelt, American eel, American shad, and river herring, may that be alewife or blue back herring. From a study from the Division of Marine Fisheries in 2013 and 2014, they counted 30,000 river herring that attempted to migrate past Watertown Dam. So these are fish that went from the ocean into Boston Harbor, through the Charles River New Dam, through, the DCR does a lot for operations of fish passage at the new dam. So 30,000 fish went from the harbor into the basin in the Charles River, went all the way up to Watertown Dam, and at that point were recorded by the Division of Marine Fisheries. And as their study notes, they had issues getting past the Watertown Dam. Another reason to potentially remove the dam is a recreational hazard, safety hazard. So if any of you have paddled the Charles River yourself, I'm sure you know that you cannot just go over this dam. You have to go to the side and portage around the dam. And that's because nobody wants to go over that. It's a safety hazard. It could potentially hurt or kill somebody. And if anybody's ever in the water there, there's low-head dams are well known for being very dangerous for their turbulence downstream of the dam. So they get caught, people usually get caught in that turbulence and can't get out and drown. So that is a possibility with low-head dams, which is what the Watertown Dam is. There is a potential benefit to upstream flooding with dam removal. So on the picture on the left here, that is the 2010 flood, and it went above and over the right or the south embankment of the dam. And potentially with that, when you remove the spillway, preliminary modeling indicates that upstream flooding would decrease. Again, this is preliminary, so we're still studying it, but that is a possibility with dam removal. And then, of course, another big reason to remove the dam is that the dam and this area has been significantly, was a significant place for indigenous peoples. As Chad mentioned, indigenous peoples in Massachusetts used to have fish weirs where the Watertown Dam is located now, and they actively use that. Of course, that is not the case now, but back in 1735, indigenous peoples in Natick actually petitioned the state legislature to stop the construction of this dam because they found it, I guess, offensive to them. So going back to this list of dam removal considerations and dam benefits and drawbacks, I'm going to try and kind of just focus in on what Watertown Dam does benefit and has drawbacks for. So obviously, I think we can all agree that there's recreational uses with the Watertown Dam. The upper Charles River Reservation Greenway is frequently used by the community in Watertown, and that is definitely very important. And that goes along with the aesthetic enhancement that the dam may have. Again, that is a preference, but that is something to consider. As for flood control benefit, because the dam is run of river and the flow coming into the dam is the same as the flow coming out, the flood control benefit is likely very minimal, if existing. For power generation, as Chad mentioned, this dam does not generate power anymore. And if it was implemented, it'd probably be very minimal and very ineffective in terms of cost. The dam does not serve as any drinking or irrigation water storage, and the dam is not significant for any navigability of the river. In terms of drawbacks, all the ones that I covered before were pretty much still there, except for disruption to natural flow. And that is, again, because the dam is a run-of-river dam. So the dam still is a fish passage barrier, still alters habitat, still impacts water quality, interrupts sediment, has risk when it comes to failure, and is a hazard, both boating, swimming, recreationally, and of course, it is a cost for DCR to maintain. So another concern is how dam removal works. There's a lot of text on this, but simply, in general, if we decide to proceed with this dam removal, generally we wait for a low flow season and a season not critical to fisheries, to fish. We secure the site, do any erosion control we can. We divert the water from upstream to downstream so it doesn't go over the spillway. We basically mechanically remove part of the dam. And then once we have all our erosion control set, everything, all the work is done, we let the water flow back over the section of the dam that was removed. And then, of course, we can plant seeds, vegetation, so that it looks nice and also it's stable for future use. All right, so as part of our study, we have renderings. We have some preliminary renderings at the moment for what Watertown Dam is intended to look like if removal were to occur. This view is from the platform on the left bank, the north bank of the river. The existing condition view is on the left, and on the right, there is our rendering of what we anticipate the river would look like if the dam were removed. The left bank, or the north bank, would probably revegetate with wetland vegetation. And on the right, there would be, again, revegetation with some gravel exposure. And the river would probably flow a little faster through that area with a few little riffles in there. Any?
So I would just add, and you'll see it in our second rendering, but in some cases, dam removal represents a substantial change to the local environment and the site itself, because you go from a large pond or lake, which is circular and wide and deep, and then the dam is removed, and all of a sudden the stream that feeds into it reestablishes itself and shrinks down, substantially, and wide open flats are exposed to become floodplain and wetland, and there's really a substantial change to the visual aesthetic of the former pond area. Because this dam is run of the river, because it essentially extends across what was the former river channel and doesn't create such a large upstream impoundment, the visual change post-dam removal is likely to be much less dramatic than in other dam removal scenarios. At the dam itself, there will definitely be a change. But once you get past the footbridge and further upstream, the changes are going to be much more subtle. And maybe, Rex, you could show the next slide. So you can explain that one.
Yeah, sure. So this is the view facing downstream or towards the dam from the footbridge. As Chad mentioned, there's no large flat left behind, we're assuming. So, we know from our measurements that there probably would not be. The dam would lower. The left side would likely become wetland vegetation, and the right side would likely have exposed gravel that looks very riverine and fairly aesthetic in our opinion. But as Chad said, there's no large mud flat anticipated for this type of project.
And in our experience with dam removal at other projects, the sediments that exist underwater upstream of most dams are very rich with a seed bank that remains viable even though it's been underwater. So in most of the dam removal projects that we've worked on, it has required very little active revegetation to achieve a restoration of the former impoundment area, because the native vegetation that's in the sediments in and of itself without any active seeding, after it's exposed to the air and the sunlight and the summer warmth, will very quickly reestablish itself and grow into what is typically a very appropriate vegetated wetland buffer, because the seeds that are growing are the seeds that are present in the watershed to begin with. So that is, that's not to say that we wouldn't do reseeding, active revegetation at this site, but just a little bit of perspective in that these ecological restoration projects, many times letting nature do the hard work is the right path.
Thank you, Chad. So yes, that is pretty much wrapping up our presentation portion of this meeting. We're going to have open questions now, but of course we're going to listen and answer. But if you want to submit any on the record public comments, please look at the slide here, look at the links, emails, and contact those.
Thank you. And just before we get to the questions, I'm told that I am to remind everyone that the meeting is still being recorded. So any questions or comments that you make will be recorded. So just bear in mind. And also, please remember, if you came in late, to sign in on the sign-in sheets. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So the slideshow is posted to DCR's website. It should be, will be, yeah. It's on the first bullet point you see here. If you want to go see the slides, it should be available at that link.
You can download it from that point.
Yes, ma'am.
Earlier in your slide, you mentioned that there wasn't any significant hydrology or hydraulic analysis of the river and flooding done. And I thought there had been through some work that.
So we thank you. And
what the difference is, what we're doing, and what was done previously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you. And I guess I should make a general statement too. If anyone saw any other issues that seem like they might be a little sketchy in our slideshow and you would like to correct us or add additional information, we're happy to get that. Clearly, yes, the Charles River watershed and the river has been well studied in terms of hydrology. The point I think we were making was that in terms of specifically for the dam and its capacity to pass what is called the regulatory spillway design flood, that had not been fully assessed. So and in fact, Rex is doing it because he's our hydrologic and hydraulic engineer. Our analysis is going to specifically focus on how water levels and flows occur right at the dam, but it is taking into account much of the work that's been done before with respect to work that's been done by the Charles River Watershed Association and other studies that it's done. So we're building on that and using that to build a body of data that's going to be specific to the dam and its responses to river flows.
And can I follow up on that? So then will you be able to show profiles that will show us exactly what the water surface elevation is currently, upstream and downstream, and what will it be post removal?
Yes, that is something that we should be able to show once that's more dived into and finalized.
And Rex got really slick two-dimensional hydraulic models still well. Yes, in the back.
Sort of related to that. So currently the water below the dam is fairly shallow. So do you expect that to stay the same, or do you expect that to be kind of leveling off? More I guess to the hydrology again. So I'm assuming that the water is much deeper above the dam than it is below. Will that change considerably, and do you have an idea of how much that will change?
Yeah, again, that's something that we're going to assess in our hydrologic and hydraulic model more detailed. But at the moment, the downstream end is actually controlled by the basin. So it varies depending on the season, operation, just how much flow is going through there right now. And we believe that it's still going to be controlled by that after the dam is removed.
The second question is more from the fisheries aspect. So once the dam is removed, how do you monitor the species, the exotic species that are coming up here? I know that there's a count that happened this year for the past couple of years, but is there a way to monitor that and you know how that will be?
So I think we would defer to our friends at the Division of Marine Fisheries for the specifics of that, and they certainly would be a partner in any post-dam removal monitoring. Permitting for dam removal is extensive, and many aspects are dealt with in the permitting process. But because Division of Marine Fisheries is a sister agency to DCR, they would likely collaborate in assessing the success of the dam removal, not just from the standpoint of fisheries, but from water quality and upstream wetland restoration and all of the sort of benefits that one would hope to get if the dam were to be removed. Sir.
What precautions are you taking to prevent all of the silt that's collected behind the dam from flowing downriver and further shallowing that whole section down until you get to the Arsenal Street Bridge?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one of the primary tasks that we have to examine as a part of this conceptual study. We recognize that sediment has built up behind the dam over the years. We've done some bathymetric surveying, meaning surveying the depths of the water behind the dam and also probing the depths of the sediment below the bottom. So we take a steel rod and poke it into the bottom and see how much soft sediment there is. So we have some idea of the volume of sediment. And that's so the answer to your question is that's a question to be answered in the future, how we're going to deal with it. But the question itself is one that we're highlighting in this study, is that any dam removal project dealing with the sediment is going to be a key issue, because we recognize that sediment transport is a natural part of any sort of riverine system, but we're in a very urban environment here, and we've got people downstream that utilize the river just the same way people utilize it upstream, and we have to make sure that we're not creating undue impacts on anybody upstream or downstream, and we have to weigh the benefits of a potential dam removal against potential detriments. So I think your point is very well taken, that sediment management is going to be key to any potential successful dam removal.
To that point, can you talk about what the study area will be? Like, how far downstream are you going to study from the dam, right? There's a really high flow area right near the dam where a lot of that sediment gets washed through. And then as it comes down around the corner towards the Noon Yacht Club, that sediment tends to fall out. Are you going to study all the way down, or how far downstream are you going to study as part of this exercise?
So I think that's currently in our works. Right now, we have it modeled to a little farther down than Arsenal Street, I believe, but we want to, take into consideration the effects of the basin. So we are thinking about doing a little farther towards, like you said, the clubs, the rowing clubs down there. But that is something we will consider.
Sorry, did you say Arsenal Street?
Sorry,
Are you go at least to Arsenal Street?
That's what we have it as right now, but
that's our preliminary model.
Yeah,
again,
preliminary model.
We're at the very beginning of our study, so any sort of hydraulic model that we will use to look at sediment transport has to extend further downstream into the sort of quiescent areas of the basin, so that we can understand exactly where sediment is going to be deposited if it's allowed to flow downstream from the impoundment in the post-breach condition.
Right. And I recognize a lot of voters from the Lower Charles here in this room, and there's a lot of concern about the current condition of sedimentation in that section of the river. And because the New Charles River Dam is not going to be removed, I think we can say that fairly confidently, that that any restoration of a sediment transport mechanism is still going to end when it gets to the lower basin. And that resource is used heavily by a lot of people, and there's a lot of concern about the current condition as well as the future condition.
Absolutely. Understood. Thank you. Sir.
And to follow up on that, my concern has to do with the 200 plus year history of industrialization along the Charles River, going all the way up to Waltham, and you go walk there now, you see all the remnants of all the factories, and it's the toxicity of the sediments. And I don't have to think too hard about Pittsfield and the Housatonic River to realize that all that material is still flowing through the Housatonic River it's just not going anywhere except downstream at a very slow rate. And so this issue of the toxicity of the settlements, I know you mentioned that was something you were going to investigate, but are you telling me that nobody has looked at this issue yet?
That certainly there have been studies. The Charles River Watershed Association study did sediment sampling. We have reviewed those sediment samples, and we've also gone out and collected our own sediment samples, which are currently being tested. And the results of those samples that we've collected this summer will be used along with the data that's been previously collected by the Charles River Watershed Association and other historic studies of the river, along with some due diligence studies of potential pollution sources that are likely to be contributors to potentially contaminated sediment within the Charles. All of that will be considered and looked at strongly, because again, if you recall our renderings, a natural consequence of dam removal is the exposure of upstream sediment. And so we have to understand what are the characteristics of that sediment and what are, if any, potential consequences to human and environmental risk for those sediments being exposed.
How long these studies have been undertaken? Are you saying that none of this data has been published yet? I mean, are those sediments?
If I could just add in, sorry, this USGS, U.S. Geologic Survey, did a comprehensive survey of Charles River sediment in 2003. That was over 20 years ago now. So what we're hoping to do is freshen up the information and the data with current data. But they have done a number of different studies up through 2010. But again, these are 10-year increments. We really want to get a current picture of what's going on.
What have those past studies shown?
I would say, I don't know if you want to characterize it. We've done some dredging in the river. I would say there are generally low levels of heavy metals, polyaromatic hydrocarbons that come from burning coal in the area that's sunk for a long time. There are low levels of PCBs.
But I don't think comparison of the Charles River sediments in this area with the issues in the Housatonic at Pittsfield, that's not an apples to apples thing. Thank God, right? Because that's a terrible situation. This is, as you say, an urban watershed with centuries of industrial development around it. So it's inevitable that there will be, that this will not be pristine sediment. And I think that's well known.
How far upstream are you going to do your assessment of the sediment issues? So there's the Moody Street Dam, there's the Bemis Dam, there's the Bleachery Dam.
Our analysis basically goes to the end of the impoundment and a little bit upstream from that. Our analysis goes upstream of the impoundment, but there is available data for right downstream of Moody Street Dam that will implement into our analysis too.
Yes.
A couple questions. We talked about doing this way before. The managers said, what are your methods to prevent the sediment from spilling down in the And secondly, we talked about what it looked like above the dam and below the dam, but in the area where the dam is sort of a rocky slope.
So your first question, methods of managing sediment. There are a number of different sort of generically considered methods for sediment management in dam removal projects. One is just straight up excavation. Go upstream, dig it up, haul it off. Typically a lesser preferred method because there's a lot of material that needs to be moved. It's got to be, in this case, trucked through highly urbanized areas. It's very difficult these days to find landfill space in the Commonwealth that will take sediment. That's just the nature of the way landfills are managed now. It's hard to find a place to do that. So but that is an option. Another option is to attempt to stabilize sediment in place using sort of harder materials like stone and riprap to prevent the now free-flowing river from scouring that sediment. Another option is to try to use softer sort of bioengineering methods to stabilize the sediment in place. So vegetation. We're currently working on a dam removal project in central Massachusetts where we lowered the impoundment several years in advance of removing the dam. So the idea was to leave the dam in place, but to basically open up the gates, let the river flow through the low-level outlet, and let the sediment in the impoundment revegetate in place, and let the root structure of the plants lock that sediment in. There are techniques called natural sediment management, which essentially means letting some of the sediment go downstream. In reality, usually it's all of the above. There's some excavation, there's some hard stabilization, there's bioengineering, and there is inevitably some transport of sediment downstream. So it's really balancing all of those methodologies and understanding what the anticipated and acceptable volumes of sediment transport are.
And then what the area was in.
Oh, yes. So, you know, again, we're in the early days of our study, but one of the sort of the most, I don't want to say extreme, but the sort of ultimate dam removal sort of methodology is essentially all man-made material is removed from the river channel. So one goes in, one dries up the area, you come in with a very large excavator with a very large hoe ram and just beat the crap out of the concrete until it rubbleizes, and then you scoop it up, haul it away, reshape the sediment into a channel, and let the river flow in what is you know, a much more natural sort of milieu, right? We would envision that there will be some stone stabilization, so that embankment on the left bank where the buildings are and the park and the pool, you know, right at that immediate area, we're probably going to want to stabilize that so we don't end up undermining the foundations of that mill building over there. On the right bank, there's a storm sewer discharge, some other structures that need to be protected. So there'll be some stabilization, but you know, one possible avenue is really a project where it's very difficult to tell there was ever a dam there after several years. That's one possible avenue to approach the design of a project like this.
But you had said earlier that it would be like ripples. There would be rocks, and it would ripple over, and there would still be some audible.
Correct.
Sound.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Ma'am.
You may have answered this already. I think on an earlier slide it talked about breach, lower, removal of the dam. Are you considering alternatives to just removing the whole thing, or? So
we're looking at, for the sake of completeness, you know, our study has asked us to look at sort of each potential kind of sort of staged possibility. So one possibility would be essentially lock the top off of the dam, right? Make it much lower than it previously was. One advantage to that would be it might no longer be considered a jurisdictional dam. So it doesn't meet the criteria of jurisdictional dam anymore. One downside to that might be doesn't really do anything for fish passage, right? It could lock the sediment in place though. So, you know, it might change the way the dam is managed without creating downstream sediment transport impacts. One possible sort of next step beyond that is simply to breach the dam, meaning much of the dam, some of the dam is left in place, and we basically just take a slice through the dam and pull it out. And then, you know, sort of the furthest down that path is essentially full removal. So where, you know, all of the concrete comes out down to the natural material and the river channel is reformed in essentially natural soil.
I'm just curious if memory serves, the dam is not that far from the major bridge on Galen Street, going right to Watertown Square. Is that any sort of a concern with if you were to take it out and or?
So, I mean, it certainly is a issue that will be looked at, because if I own that bridge, I'd want to know, is my bridge at risk? Again, we're in early days, but my initial sense is that because of the run-of-the-river nature of the dam, where the dam really just impacts upstream and doesn't really attenuate flows going downstream, removal of the dam really wouldn't change conditions at the bridge itself.
From a fisheries perspective, is there any effort to improve any of the existing fish numbers on the River Charles? I mean, I can see that this is going to impact, but there's still dams above this current dam, which are certainly going to still impact the ability of fish to go up the river. So, is there any effort to improve those? I mean, those fish ladders got to be like 100 years old, at least.
I will tell you that part of our study is to categorize and catalog upstream fish passage structures above the Watertown Dam, but with respect to improvements or changes to those, that is, as they say, above my pay grade. So our study is currently focused, on the Watertown Dam, but one would imagine that, future efforts would be would look upstream, because, as you say, one leads to the next, leads to the next.
So there's nobody here from the fisheries wildlife.
We will be consulting with them as the process of the summer, and we'll have another second meeting in the fall, and hopefully have some more input from them for that as well.
That's actually part of our project, is to specifically reach out to Division of Marine Fisheries and get input from them. Ma'am.
So my name's Maria Rose, and I've done modeling, but it was like 25 years ago. I've done dredging projects, and I used to work for the city. And so to answer that question, the stream that feed into Laundry Brook discharges right into the Charles River by the dam, and you do see fish passage. So the feeder streams that come in, the less obstacles there are. We see eels, and I've seen smelt in the upstream in Laundry Brook, and Cheesecake Brook, actually.
So your point being that even if the fish can't get further up the Charles, it gives them access to tributary streams between here and the next barrier. Okay,
and
thank
then
you.
I just wanted to applaud you for looking at bioengineering. I was going to say there is no place to take the sediment, because I've done dredging projects and there is no place. Where are you going to take it, right, Nancy? And so many years ago, decades ago, phytoremediation was a big term for treating PAHs, petroleum aromatic hydrocarbons. And for people that are scared by any of these terms, I will tell you that PAHs are in your side, like the loam border, the grass border. You tested your side just because of how close it is to the roadway, where the pH is like everywhere. So don't be so afraid by some of the technical terms, because nature has a way of healing itself. And so it depends on the concentration, obviously. And so I'm wondering if there's anything that you could do cool to like encapsulate it and let plants take up, and over time it just keeps healing. So.
That's certainly an approach we will be looking at. Sort of some capping is an approach to dealing with sediment in some cases. So and you're right. The bioremediation is a process that sort of naturally occurs. So, over time, things get better typically, unless it's the Housatonic in Pittsburgh. So,
just a quick question. So you talked about the different options for dam removal and also channeling of the river. As part of the study, I know it's sort of a hypothetical question, but in your experience with dams like this, would we ever consider the idea of the channel of the river being affected at the dam site, obviously, but then as the flow of the river continues downstream, talked about sedimentation carrying the water through. We also mentioned that because of the nature of the dam, it doesn't really change the volume of the water passing through the river. Is there anything you can share with us about the impact of dam removal relative to the water flow and characteristics of the riverbed downstream, as it relates to sedimentation or flow of the river, depth of channel, and so
on? I think, again, it's very context dependent because it depends on what's behind the dam, right? And then the historical context of sediment transport in that river. But I think a lot of studies that have looked at it kind of see a pulse of sediment come down. So you see kind of, usually dams cause sediment downstream of dams to get very coarse. So it washes away a lot of the fine sediment, or it gets held up.
Sometimes that's called sediment starvation.
Yes.
So fine sediments drop out upstream of the dam and are not carried downstream as they are typically under natural conditions. And so, as was noted, the area immediately downstream of the dam is very rocky, very cobbly. In part, that's because all of the fine sediments have been washed away and have not been replaced by the finer sediments that would have naturally come downstream had they not been stopped by the dam.
Yeah, exactly. But you generally see a pulse of finer sediment. So it comes and it settles in kind of nooks and crannies of that sediment-starved stream. And it might be a lot for a little bit, then it's transported downstream in the next flood. But again, this is an interesting context because the basin is downstream of that. So that's something that we will have to study, the effects of the basin on this sediment transport, or how we think it's going to respond to it based on our modeling. So it is an interesting context. But there are dam removals that have occurred. It's not exactly the same, but in tidal rivers. And we could probably look into how that's gone and passed through those systems.
What would the time frame look like for project reports being made and then going to funding, and when would the dam be gone by?
So I can only tell you what I know, which is that our study is intended to be completed by the end of this calendar year, and then it moves on to whatever next phases that happen at the state.
About the ones you're working on now, how long ago did they start?
So, yeah, it actually turns out to be, again, a very complex process to permit a dam removal. Because, so even though dam removals are now currently considered an ecological restoration project under the state environmental regulations, they still create vast amounts of change in the environment. And there are people who have very legitimate reasons to be both for and against dam removals. And particularly if you happen to be an abutter who lives on a pond and someone wants to remove that pond, you might be somewhat peeved by that notion. So the state gives a great amount of time and puts a great amount of effort into collecting public comment, into doing a full environmental permitting process before any dam removal can be undertaken. Once you get going, it actually happens very quickly. It's surprising how few times you really got to hit a big piece of concrete with a hoe ram before it starts to become a cart. But the amount of paperwork that has to be generated prior to that is not inconsequential. And I would point everyone to Natick and have you watch the process that they're going to go through, and that will give you some thoughts on the timelines.
So, two questions. The first is about if the dam were to be removed, letting the seed bank and the sediments naturally revegetate. I've heard that's a very effective way to restore the area after dam removal. So it looks terrible the first year, and then it looks wonderful the next year. But I am curious if you've done a dam removal in a real urban environment where there might be a lot of invasives in the sweeping. And are there any case studies in that type of situation and like what the end outcome was?
So I will be the first to admit I have not done a dam removal in an environment as urban as this. I'm not sure that I would think there are very few people who could say that they have. Your point about invasives is a good one. I have worked on dam removals where invasive species were a concern, and it's absolutely a legitimate concern because in that period of time between when the dam is removed and the former impoundment is sort of bare soil to the time when the vegetation is reestablished, that's a prime time for invasives to take hold. So in one case, we actually used a program of beetle farming and beetle releases to control a known area of purple loosestrife that we were concerned that was going to recolonize the former impoundment. And that ended up being, reasonably effective, but that's definitely a concern, invasives, and that's something that needs to be considered. So I think we're coming close. We have to be out of here by 8:45. So we can take a couple of more questions, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak to DCR. DCR is sort of cost around this project as the owner of the dam. Do you have a predisposition? Or
I would say not exactly. We are working, we meet frequently with Charles River Watershed Association. And I believe we have a sponsor for our earmark here. We don't. But I want to say we were energized from the act of the legislature to look at the alternatives for the Watertown Dam and also for this passage on the Charles as part of the same study. But primarily we're focusing here on the Watertown Dam. What we're trying to understand is how does it support DCR's values and some of the elements of the mission statement touched on at the beginning. And I think this study, which is scheduled to be done this fall, will help provide us that information. The input we're going to get from the community. Questions also come up later, or say ideas for questions. We do want to take further public comments on our website and try to help build as much understanding from the community of, as GCA has pointed out, the pros, the cons, and what people want to understand as a result of this. And if we have to ask that our consultant team study this a little bit more for any reason, we'd be happy to do that. We've actually been able to do a little extra time that was originally allotted for this to make sure we kind of get the study right. So, but the focus is to try to have some of these answers, and at least some of the answers as fall.
So you're saying that there might be another meeting in the fall, but these gentlemen are saying their study won't be done until the end of the year?
Consultants always stretch the timeline out. they want us done by the fall. No, you are not. You are absolutely not. It's supposed to be done by the fall.
We don't have a date yet, but we'll be reaching out again with more advance notice. I have to say this was a little short, and we apologize for that. But because we wanted to get something out before everybody was away for the summer, we were trying to get this word out and get people familiar with what we were trying to do.
One more.
Preliminarily speaking, like I have to imagine with hundreds of years of pollution, it's kind of there's strata in the sediments, and I'm guessing like most of the nastiest stuff would be like the 50s, 60s, 70s. Like has it kind of self-capped? Like if, from what you've seen so far, there's enough clean enough sediment on top that like
That's a very interesting point, and it's something that we're looking at.
The library will close at 9 p.m. In 25 minutes, the library will close at 9 p.m.
So I will finish up my answer to this, and then we will all skeet out. Yes, it's a very interesting point, and you're absolutely right about sediment horizons and about, as you drive down into the sediment, you're sort of going in a time machine and looking backwards in time. The deeper you go, the farther back in time you are. And you're right. There's a period in time where we were much less aware of the consequences of just dumping all our stuff out in the river. And somewhere hidden in that sediment strata are those legacy pollutants. And you're right that further up, there's the potential for cleaner sediments that may act as a barrier towards exposure in the future if those sediments are exposed. So yeah, a great point and something we'll be looking at.
So again, on behalf of DCR and CRWA and the team, thank you for coming out tonight and your interest in the project. And we'll keep you posted. Again, your sign-up information helps us reach out to you for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.